The mules are in the corral. Welcome to Mule Talk, and I'm Cindy K. Roberts, your host.
And my sidekick, our author, TV personality, and world-renowned mule trainer, Meredith Hodges of the Lucky 3 Ranch. Meredith sounds a little froggy because she had laryngitis a few days ago, but we'll get through it. Meredith, we're going to talk about rock and roll. This is part 2. So,
part 2 is going to be roll after rock passed.
Okay.
So rock is gone.
Yeah.
And roll is left on his own in the pen with no more teammate that he had been with for, 18, 19 years. These animals, they grieve too. And they're really sad when their friends go.
Yeah.
And so I try to be as supportive as I can with them. During turnout, I went ahead and turned him out into the dressage arena where all the South Barn mules on the south side, their pens open up into the dressage arena. And so he had 5 animals along that side that he could talk to.
Wow.
Now, this is when I found out how these guys can be kind of racist. Because all the mules on that side of the barn, with the exception of Angel and Merlin, were black.
Oh.
And Roll could care less.
Really?
Yeah, he could care less about the black mules because he's red.
Okay, so he wanted to hang out with the red mules. Oh,
yeah, and Angel was a red roan, and Merlin was a red dun. He decided that he liked to hang out at the end of their runs. And I had to double up the chains there because he thought he would let them out because he wanted them to be in turnout with him. He found some friends, and that was the beginning of him starting to feel better, you know. So we kind of did that, and that was good. But you're thinking about all these things. There's a lot to think about, you know. He lost his friend. He wasn't feeling very good because of that. And so he got kind of sloppy in his posture and everything, even though he had graduated to the round pen. He had a really bad case of ring bone and side bones in 3 feet and a mild case in 1 foot. So he basically had ring bone and side bones in all 4 feet. And my goal was to get him strong enough in his good core posture so that he would be able to carry me as a rider. Now, I didn't expect him to be able to carry a heavier person than me because even though he's a really big mule, he was 17 and a half hands. That's a big mule and everything, but big isn't necessarily strong. You kind of got to look at it like what their capabilities are in the way that they are and the background that they've had. And rock and roll were never in good posture. They spent their whole life pulling wagons by pushing out the back instead of stepping under their torso and pushing up with that, which meant that that's how they got the ring bone and the side bones, was all that stress in the wrong carriage, in the wrong posture. And so I had to redo their habitual way of moving. So I used the hourglass pattern with the elbow pull like I did with everybody else. And that seemed to work pretty well. Although Rock never graduated to the round pen, he was so bad because of that hip that he didn't have the opportunity to really do the faster gaits. He could only be sound at the walk. And Roll, on the other hand, oh boy, that boy. He was a mischievous little guy, man, and he was always trouble. You know, he was looking for trouble. I think I told you in part 1 how he had this vice of cribbing, and he was mortified when he found himself in an all-metal pen. All-metal pen with steel panels that he couldn't eat, you know. But he tried, you know, he really tried. That was just one thing, but he was kind of a busy guy, too. So during the massages and everything, it was fine, you know, when my equine masseuse was able to massage Rock. And then I asked her to show me how to massage And so I did roll, and I practiced on roll, and I got pretty good at it. But I think she was kind of afraid of him anyway, because he really wouldn't stand still either. He was a busy boy. He was so busy. He was doing things all the time. I'd be massaging him on his neck, and then he would be doing something with his hind legs and moving them back and forth and all of that. And then when I got to the back, I went ahead, I put the towel on the hitch rail at some point. He went ahead and grabbed it off the hitch rail and dropped it on the floor. And so then I went to the front to pick it up. And I had a step stool that I used because he was so big. As soon as I went to the front to grab the towel off the floor, he moved over and put the step stool underneath his torso, so I couldn't stand on it.
Yeah.
And then I moved it out from under his torso, and he moved over again and put it back under his torso. He kept me kind of busy that way. And then another time I was doing his neck, and so I put the bath towel over his neck to keep the massager from getting really dusty or anything. And he reached around and grabbed the towel, and I tried to get it back from him, but he didn't want to give it to me. So we ended up playing tug-of-war for about 15 minutes.
Right.
Because he wouldn't let go of the towel.
There you go.
No way he was going to do that.
Yeah.
Being busy like that and being really big, he's quite intimidating, but it didn't really intimidate me all that much. I knew he was just playing games with me. He just had a mischievous personality. The more I played with him, the less anxious he became, and the more he was playful and not trying to just get out of the way of everything I was trying to do. He eventually gave in and decided, I guess I can stand still for a while. But when I say we're done, we're done. And so I learned to listen to him that way. The other thing that he taught me, too, was even as big as he and Rock were, Rock was 18 hands, Roll was 17 and a half hands, and they had very, very large bodies with a lot of muscle on them, and they looked really tough. But I learned that they weren't all that tough, and that everything that they had been doing out of good posture had really affected their bodies in a negative way.
Yeah.
So they were really touchy in a lot of places.
Yeah.
So I had to be really careful about how much pressure I put on them when I was massaging them. And I decided that the smart thing to do was to just go ahead and start massaging him, whether it was with my hands or with the thumper that we used, and let him control the pressure that he wanted. So when he wanted more pressure, he would just lean into me, and I would just hold steady. And when he wanted to relieve the pressure, he would move away a little bit. But he stuck with it. And he even let me use that thumper around his face and everything, too.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Wow.
Oh, yeah. I even used the thumper on his ears.
Wow.
But as long as I was being polite like that, he thought it felt pretty good.
Ah.
You know, and we got a different kind. You know, the one I was using was one with a hand holder on it. But then we got another one that was one that you can use. It's kind of like has a belt on it. And that was better because you hold that one from both sides. And you can do the forehead with that one real easy. And so I'd just stand there in front of him and hold that thumper, and he'd just put his head right on it, his forehead on it, and just push against it and just get all dreamy. And he was just like, oh, this feels great. I had a headache, and it's going away. You know, we were having all these great discussions, you know, while massaging. And I do think it's really important that you think about it in those terms, because it's really easy to think that they're stronger than they are, that they aren't as sensitive as they are. And it just makes more sense to let them control the pressure, because then they really enjoy it. Then
Yeah.
you see, you know, that their eyes are not looking distressed or anything. They look soft and like they're going to sleep, or they might open them up and get real eager about it and go, oh, I need more pressure. That's kind of how you read them. You learn to read them a whole lot differently than you would if you were trying to apply the pressure that you thought they should have. So I think that's a really important thing, and it certainly was important with Roll, because Roll just flat wouldn't let you do anything with him if he thought you were going to hurt him.
Yeah.
He was always spooky. He was always hiding behind rock, and snorting at you and everything, and that didn't scare me. I just told him, I said, I think you're just bluffing. In addition to the massages, when I would get done with the massages and the muscles were warm, then I could go ahead and start doing some stretches. But I realized that they were going to be stiff all through their whole body because of the fact that they had been moving out of good posture for so very long. So if I did range of motion exercises on their legs, I had to be really, really careful, because I could end up straining muscles, tendons, ligaments by pulling too hard on the legs going the other direction from what they're used to.
Okay.
That was another case where I let them control the pressure. I would grab the leg and go ahead on the front legs and grab it at the bottom, rest their hoof in my hand, in the palm of my hand. I wouldn't grab them around the fetlock or anything. And then I would just let them push hard. I would tap on their knee and ask them to straighten their legs. They would do it if they could, and if they couldn't, if they just couldn't flatten that knee, then I would lower the hoof, and then I would just keep lowering it a little bit and a little bit and a little bit until they could straighten that leg. Then I knew how far they could go, and then I realized how every time I went back, they were able to hold that leg a little bit higher and flatten that knee with the leg up a little bit higher. Now, with the back legs were really tough coming forward because they were used to initiating the power from behind from a camped out position. They were not able to really arc their back, tuck their hips, and step well under. So again, I just put that foot in the palm of my hand and let them control how far forward they could come with it. And most of the time they couldn't come very far forward at all. And then when I was taking it the other direction out the back, I wouldn't hold the leg at all, because now the hoof is going backwards, and I didn't want it rocked in my hands. So what I would do is I put my knee under the hock, and I let them rest, the front of their hock on my knee and do the stretch themselves. I only took it back until I met resistance, and then I just stood still. And I let them do it. And they did, rock and roll both. They go, oh, we're stretching. Okay, good. And so the main stretches that I really got aggressive with were stretching them all the way to the floor. When I got them to put their nose on the floor, then I asked them to stretch their nose even further between their legs, when they could really stretch that back all the way across and bring that nose right between their legs, their front legs. And each time I would ask them to go a little further and a little further. And then I prepped them for bowing by picking up the left front leg and asking them to put that nose right between those legs. But I didn't let them go all the way down, because I knew that if they tried to do that, they'd probably just fall over, because they were still weak. They were big, but they were weak. That was more of a move just to get them to yield the legs to me. And I did them on both sides. I would pick up the left leg on the left side and the right leg on the right side, and, keep it balanced and ask them to tuck that head between those legs. And then when I was asking them to stretch to the side, then I would ask them just to go as far as they could. When I did that, they wanted to back up. They would turn their head, and then they would start backing up. So what I did was I just put my right hand on the left side. I put my right hand on the butt and held it and then I had the oats in the left hand, and I coaxed them around with the oats while I just put pressure with the right hand if they started to back up, and just tapped them a little bit on the butt and said, no, don't move. Just stay where you are, and just wrap that head around to me. Mm-hmm. And then if it was really too hard for them to get to my hand, I would extend the hand to them, which got a little crazy sometimes because they were really big. And so trying to keep my hand on the butt while I was trying to feed the face, it got a little stretchy for me.
Yeah.
But it worked, and eventually they were really bending around. And the other thing that I was looking out for, too, when I was doing this was how are they doing it? What I noticed when they were bending is how they were bending their head and their neck. And they were trying to put their muzzle in my hand. But a lot of times what happened was that would twist their head to the outside and tweak it a little bit, so they weren't really coming around in a smooth line, if that makes any sense. What I wanted them to do was just to bend the head and the neck, keep the nose in front of the top of the neck, and move the whole head around in an arc together without tipping it sideways one way or the other, because that was going to give them a kink in their neck if they did that. Eventually, they got it, and I just wouldn't ask them to bend any further or stretch any further than they were able to do it correctly. I didn't want any head tilting. The one thing that I tested, too, when I was doing that was, at that point in time, a lot of people were using bitless bridles and Bosals and hackamores, and I thought about the action that those kinds of headstalls have on the animal. And Roll kind of showed me how it was when he bent his neck and when I wanted him to keep it all in line from his withers all the way to his muzzle, with a nice smooth arc across his neck, between his ears and down his nose, and then coming back to me. Didn't want any twisting or anything like that. And so I wondered about the angles on these bridles that we use. If when you turn them, in a bridle like that, is that going to impair that smooth, fluid kind of turn and arcing of the neck and head? So I took Roll's bridle off, put him in his halter, and I decided, the halter's kind of like a side pole anyway. And when I pulled on the side of the halter, now I had it fit to his face, and it was fit right snug up against his face, not tight, just laying on his face. And the noseband was situated about 1.5 inches, 2 inches below those cheekbones that kind of stick out a little bit. And they're kind of high. They're higher than the corners of the lips. And so I thought, okay, so if you pull from that side, what happens? I asked myself, and I asked Roll, okay, I'm going to pull on this halter, and you show me what your reaction's going to be when I do that. And Roll, of course, said, oh, really? Yeah, this is what we're doing, Roll. Like, oh, do we really have to do this? Yes, Roll, we really have to do it. And you have to stand four square while you're doing this. I don't want you moving around either. I want you to stand four square and give me a nice fluid bend of your head and neck when I pull on this pressure point right from here. And I went ahead and pulled, and he resisted me and pulled his head the other direction, which told me there's too much pressure up there by his ears and the pole to bend his head that way. Because he's got if you look at it according to physics, you got a long line from the ears to the withers, and then from the ears to the point of those bones is short. So if you're pulling that line on that short side, that means he's got to crank it pretty hard right there where those two lines meet. And I thought, well, that might be why people have so much trouble with these mules. Because if you have a triangle up there that has equal sides on it, generally speaking, especially draft mules, the heads on the draft mule as long as they are going to come pretty close to meeting the same distance as it is from behind the ears to the withers. I said, okay, Ro, we're going to try this now. And he goes, try what? I said, we're going to try this a different way, okay? And he gets all bright-eyed, and he goes, oh, you mean we're going to walk away? And he starts to walk away. I go, no, we're not going to do that. Just stand square again. We're going to try this differently. I took off the halter, and I went ahead and stuck my little finger in the corner of his mouth. And then I wiggled it, and I stood by his shoulder and asked him to bend his head towards me, and no resistance at all. He just went ahead and did that same arc that he had been doing in his stretches and just followed my little finger right around the corner to where my knee would be if I was sitting on the saddle. And I thought, oh, wow. And he's keeping the nice fluid line on that arc. He's not twisting his head one way or the other, and he's giving really, really easily. The only thing that I could really observe at that point was that when you don't crank them from the wrong angle, you're not going to get that resistance. They're going to go ahead and comply, which he did. And when I did all my other animals the same way and paid attention to during the stretches on how I was asking them to make those arcs and bend that spine around and that head and that neck and that nose and keep it all in line, it didn't hurt them anywhere. It didn't get any kinks in it, if you will. And that added to them being light in the bridle, especially when they're turning and everything, you know. Then it doesn't take much. They get resistance because what they're doing hurts. And we don't always have the presence of mind to think about those things. And I was doing all this massage and everything on him, and these stretches and learning all of this, it made quite a difference when I got him into the tack and equipment, and it was going to make a huge difference when I finally got on to ride him because I didn't want to end up in a fight with him. It all went very well. The other things that we did, my vet came out about once a month, and we went ahead and did x-rays to keep track of the ring bone and the side bones in all of his feet because those were pretty severe, and we wanted to make sure that we weren't getting additional calcium deposits. You know, he also had a little bit going on in the stifle that I could feel when he was massaged. But in order to take any x-rays that high up, he would have had to have been anesthetized and flipped on his back to take those kind of x-rays. And I opted not to do that. But we just kept an eye on what was going on below the knees and his legs. What we discovered was that with the core strength training, he was keeping his posture really very well in the hourglass pattern when he was being led around in the elbow pull. And he was doing so well that he actually graduated to the round pen. And when he graduated to the round pen, then he started twisting in his right hind foot. And I wondered, what the heck's going on there? Now, if that keeps up, that's going to aggravate the side bone and the ring bone that's in that foot. And even at some point, he was aggravating it in both hind feet. I had to kind of rattle my brain and decide, okay, what am I going to do here? What is going on with this? And the first time I determined that maybe I had let him go too long between trims and his feet were getting long. I had my farrier come out and he trimmed him back, and when he trimmed him back and we put him back in the round pen, then he was doing okay again. Then he was balanced again. Then he wasn't wobbling again. He wasn't twisting. And I thought, oh, this is good. This works. I watched him very carefully over the next few weeks and determined that he couldn't go 6 to 8 weeks between trims and shoes. We had shoes on his back feet because with the twist, he was wearing that foot, those back feet, unevenly. And in order to keep him in good posture, those feet had to stay in good posture. We determined, okay, we got to do this every 4 weeks. And so we did that. But then all of a sudden, after 4 weeks, he was wobbling again at 3 weeks. Right. And I thought, well, what is going on here? I determined that I had 4 inches of sand in the round pen. He was getting bogged down in the sand. We took another inch off the top of the sand and pulled it out of there. So now it's only 3 inches deep.
Okay.
And then he went sound again. And then everything was working really well for a while. And then pretty soon he was getting wobbly again. But this was after 6 weeks. So that was good. He lengthened the time that we had to trim him. He was getting wobbly at 6 weeks for a few weeks. And we determined that this was just unbelievable. He was having trouble because the round pen itself was sitting uneven. It was sitting, however gradual the slope was, it was sitting on the side of a slope. When he was going around the round pen, he was going uphill, and then he was turning around and going downhill, and uphill and downhill. We took down the whole round pen and rebuilt it. We put a transit on it. We got the ground absolutely flat and rebuilt the round pen. We had to take it up quite a bit. We took up that low end probably 1.5 to 2 feet to level it, and then built a retaining wall so it wouldn't get unlevel again, and we built it up so it's absolutely flat. Then he was able to go between 6 and 8 weeks between trims, because now he's in good posture all the way around, and there was no wobbling in his back end at all. And I was getting really excited because I was going, oh, goody, I'm going to be able to ride him and maybe even light drive him. I talked to the vet about it, and he goes, well, I think you'll be able to ride him, but I don't know about the light driving. He said that's going to affect him and put him back in that old posture that he's used to, tucking his feet out the back, and it will aggravate the new posture that you're trying to build. So I would give up on driving. When you're on him, you'll be able to affect his posture and hold it and support it and help him to maintain it. And so I said, well, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. We went that way for a while, and then it was really exciting. I didn't know how he was going to behave because he's such a mischievous guy, man, and I didn't know what he would do. But I had done exercises with him in the tack barn. Now, I've had a lot of people tell me, you shouldn't mount him inside the building because he's likely to rear up and crash you into the ceiling and everything. But see, I was never afraid of that because we did a lot of prep work about how you behave when you're in the tack barn. And no, you don't pull on the rope. No, you don't get silly. Right. No, you don't do this. These are the boundaries. This is the way you're supposed to behave. And when I ask you to stand still, I expect you to stand still. And when you do stand still, you're going to stand still with your front feet together and your back feet together with equal weight over all 4 feet. And if you start moving around and being silly, you don't have equal weight over all 4 feet. So before I even thought about mounting him, and I do this with all of my mules, I got them so that they would behave before I mounted them in that building. They did, and I got my step stool and climbed up on his back, and then I had the lead rope really loose tied to the hitch rail, and then I would lean over on the left and ask him to come and take the oats out of my hand by bending his head and his neck around the way he did when we did the stretches during massage. This is all repetitive behavior. He knows what to expect. He knows what I expect from him when I ask him to bend his head and neck like that. And from sitting on top, it was a whole different perspective to see how that head and neck was bending from above. Now, I had seen it from standing on the ground, and I had seen the side of it and everything, and how his head and neck bent, and it looked like it was doing the right thing. It was just validated by sitting on top of his back and asking him to bend that head and neck around. Because I had done all that work on the ground, he knew how to do it correctly, and he did. And I could see that whole premise was correct, to do it that way. And so I would do that from both sides. I had him take the oats out of my hand, and I made sure that I leaned well over so that I wasn't asking him to crank his nose up towards me. I wanted him to keep it fluid and keep it level and keep it at my knee where it was before when I bent it from the ground. And being aware of all those things and making those movements with continuity, consistency, and everything will make sure that the core strength is being built correctly around the bone. If you don't do it the same way, then you're going to get compromises and soreness and kinks and things like that. So they all learn how to behave themselves inside the building. When I take them to the round pen, I go ahead, and in this case, I was going to mount him for the first time. And I always make sure I've got an assistant. So Steve helped me with that. He carried the mounting block into the round pen with me, and we set it next to roll. After I set him up, he wasn't afraid of it because he had already had that mounting block next to him in the building. I had climbed up and down on both sides and everything and got him used to all of that in that building. So going out in the round pen and doing it there, we were just out in the open doing the same thing. So I climbed up on his back, and then I went ahead and asked him to bring his head around, just like we did in the building. Then I had Steve take the mounting block away. He came and Roll stood stock still until Steve got back, and then I said, walk on. And he walked on, and Steve walked by his head. We didn't have a lead rope on or anything. He just followed at Steve's shoulder because that's what he learned in the hourglass pattern. This is just repetitive behaviors of what he has already learned. And just building on that, he did so well that I waited till the next week, and then we did it without Steve. I brought the mounting block into the round pen, climbed up there myself, went ahead and made him reach around for the oats and everything, and he was really good about that. And then Steve was there, so I asked him to take the mounting block out of the round pen. Didn't want any accidents. And you don't want to fall on a mounting block, believe me. Yeah, Merlin jumped me on the ground rails one time, and I decided that having things like that in the arena or in the round pen when they're not 100% solid is probably not a good idea.
Yeah.
Ro learned how to do all of that. He learned that he really liked having me ride him. Then he got graduated to the open arena out by the mobile home, out by the Jasper bunkhouse, and we had the hourglass set up out there, and then that's where he learned to do the hourglass with me on his back. But see, what I did before I did that was first I led him through it like I had done before. Well, actually, first I led him around the perimeter because it was a new location, and I wanted him to be able to inspect everything and see everything that was around it. And then I went ahead and ground drove him after leading him through the hourglass pattern. Then I ground drove him through it before I actually got on and rode him through it. But we did exactly the same things, whether we were leading, ground driving, or riding. So nothing came as a big surprise. And I thought that the hay was out there growing and everything. It was probably, up to my chest. It was really high. But I thought he might like to go for a walk outside the open arena. So I went ahead and took him out there. And we walked around in this really, really deep grass. And then I finally got on and rode him through the deep grass, which accomplished one of our goals, which was to be able to ride him in the hayfield. And he did, and he wasn't snatching grass because he knew that was unacceptable. I had led him through the hayfield before. He kept his head at my shoulder then, and he was attached to my hands on the lines from the ground driving when I was riding him through there. So nothing was new. When we got through doing a little pattern through the hayfield, then I gave him the reins and I said, okay, you can snatch some grass now. And I let him get a mouthful of grass, and then I just held him up, let him chew it, and then we left. But keeping things really orderly like that really made a huge difference. He was a happy camper, and we established goals, and we met those goals. And I got to ride roll from 2011 until late in 2000, probably December of 2015. And then all of a sudden he started having trouble on those back legs again. Took him back to the round pen and he just wasn't doing very well. I established that maybe it was because the sand was getting built up against the side of the round pen. So I went ahead and took the rake and flattened it out, and that helped some. But there was something else going on. I just knew it. And so I backed off and decided not to ride him anymore, not to lunge him anymore, go back to the leading exercises and do those to solidify his posture again and his core strength. Did that for a while, and it just didn't seem right. He was lazy. He was bulky. He was acting like he was sore. So I called out my farrier, and he came out, and he took the shoes off, went ahead and went digging around. He goes, Meredith, he's got white line. I went, aha, okay. How did he get that? His pen is as dry as a bone.
Yeah.
But the vet, I consulted with the vet, and the vet says that it's not always because of boggy wet mud or anything like that. It's a fungus.
Wow.
And they can pick that up anywhere. It got in there, and my farrier dug a big hole right where the hoof wall was attached to the sole. And it was deep, all the way around the outside of it and into the medial section. And he started trimming off the dead stuff. We tried leaving it on for a couple of weeks and just flushing it with betadine and cleaning it up about 3 times a day, but we weren't really getting anywhere with it. So we called the vet back in. He looked at it and he says, you're going to have to pare this hoof wall completely off of here. The farrier started paring the hoof wall away, and by the time he got done, he had the hoof wall gone. 2/3 of the hoof wall was gone on the one outside. And because that's where all the fungus was, and we had to do it. Then we went ahead and treated it, and you'll be able to see all the different things that we had to do. My farrier built a shoe for him that was only as big as the 1/3 of his hoof to support that hoof. So he got that put on there, and that worked pretty well for a little while. Even that wasn't working very well, and we had to clean that thing 3 times a day. And we had stuff that was, white lightning was meant to be used to clean up white line, and so we used that too. My vet was afraid that using the providone iodine was going to dry it out too much, and so that's why we switched to the white lightning. Then we decided that the shoe wasn't really doing all that much good anyway. We thought it would be better for him to just be barefoot on that foot. Now, generally speaking, when you have a foot that's that compromised, what will happen is the animal will shift its weight to the diagonal front foot if it's a hind foot like that.
Yeah.
We weren't holding out much hope that he was ever going to be sound again, because the next thing that would happen is that right front foot would collapse from the weight. But that didn't happen. Because of his core strength training, he was able to distribute his weight over the remaining 3 feet instead of just the 1. And that allowed us to grow out that foot completely. It took 8 months to grow out that hind foot again to a completely new foot. At one point, we thought the foot was dead, and we looked at it because it had growth right by the cornet band, and we thought, oh, that doesn't look good. And the vet came out, and he looked at that. He said, Meredith, I think this is live tissue. I think he's trying to grow a new foot. So I said, okay, well, we'll just operate on that premise. We won't work him. We won't put any pressure. He can be in turnout. As long as we're dealing with this white line stuff, that's what we'll do. We'll keep his pen dry. He'll have 4 inches pea gravel in that pen. It was just grossly hot, man, during the summer when he had to go through the summer with this. Most of the time, he would just go into his stall and stand in the shavings where it was really comfortable on that foot because it wasn't hard like the rocks were. It was springy in the stall. And it was over 100 degrees outside, and that way he could get out of the heat. And we had fans in the barn that helped cool him down a little bit. And at one point, it was, I think, in May, he was just dripping wet. I thought, well, God, seems like he's got a fever, so I had the vet come out. And he took his temperature, and he goes, no, he says he's just hot because he's still got his winter coat in there. I thought, well, I'm going to try something here. I know that when I cut their bridle paths, I learned in the wintertime that they still got chilled if I cut their bridle paths. So I quit doing that, and I let them grow out. And that kept them warm in the winter. So I thought, if I clip the bridle path, it will help to cool him down because it will let that hot air out of his body through that area that's clipped. And it worked. It didn't take probably 20 minutes after I clipped his bridle path, and I clipped it well back, that he dried off. He wasn't sweaty anymore, and he was comfortable and standing in the stall, and everything was fine. So it's just a matter of thinking these things through and deciding what might work and being willing to give it a try. So we did that, and then, like I said, 8 months later, that whole foot was grown out again. When it was all grown out, then the farrier came in and trimmed the foot, trimmed all 4 feet the same. We didn't put shoes back on because we hadn't been working the whole time that he had white line. We didn't wear the feet down or anything. We just kept balancing them, and the farrier just came more often. And I think you got to do that. You know, you have to make assessments with the farrier. You can't just say, well, my farrier is going to come every 6 to 8 weeks or every month or whatever and make that standard, because there's nothing standard about their bodies, and especially if their bodies are compromised like this.
Yeah.
You got to watch it, and you got to act accordingly, and you got to be prompt about it, because the longer you let it go, the more out of balance they're going to get, which is going to cause more problems. So you just stay on top of it, be willing to be flexible, consult with a vet, consult with a farrier. The other thing is it's really important to make sure that your chiropractor sees them, to keep the bones aligned. They need to make sure that all those bones are aligned when they're being worked, because they need to work in good posture. And if those bones aren't aligned, then they're going to have compromises in their body. And that's how those guys got ring bone and side bones in the first place, was being out of good posture. I know that when Fran had them, she used the same chiropractor that I have. So she was putting them into alignment before I even got them. Which I was grateful that she did that.
Sure.
You know, that was really smart to do that. The other thing you need to keep in mind, too, is that sometimes doing a chiropractic adjustment like that, if they haven't been used to moving in good posture and you're doing all this work to attain the good posture, that they're going to be sore from changing the posture. When the chiropractor adjusts them, it's important to go ahead and follow up the chiropractic adjustments with massage the next day. And don't do it the other way around. The massage is not going to put their bodies in alignment. The chiropractics does. And it has to be done regularly. It can't be done only when they're out of good adjustment. It has to be a regular thing, especially in a therapeutic situation like rolls, because he's going to fall out of good posture every time he gets sore with those ring bone and side bones in all 4 feet. You don't know when he's going to get sore or where he's going to get sore. So you got to watch it, and you got to adjust your plan accordingly. But knowing that the chiropractics can make him a little bit sore, if you get those bones aligned and then let the masseuse get in there and kind of get everything loose and comfortable and relaxed, then he'll more likely be able to stay in that good posture longer. And as time goes by, what happens is maybe in the very beginning, you'll have to have the chiropractor out every week for about 2-3 weeks maybe. Then you can go to every other week. for 2-3 weeks. Then you go to every 2 weeks and every 3 weeks, and you just keep building it up until you don't have to have the chiropractor out there, but maybe once a month or once every 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And because they're going to be holding that posture longer and longer and longer. And that's what a human chiropractor will do with you if you have a problem with your back. You can't just go to the chiropractor once and expect to be fixed.
Yeah.
Doesn't work like that. Just doesn't work like that. And it should always be followed up by massage. Now, sometimes, too, even the massage can make you feel a little sick if you've been out of good posture. So when the chiropractor puts you back in alignment and then you go get a massage, you can kind of feel a little nauseous.
Really?
And what my doctor told me to do and my chiropractor told me to do is just take some Advil after the massage. That will just keep you from getting anxious about it. And in the case of your animal, if he really needs it, he can have a little bute. Doesn't have to be for 5 days. Just give him a little bute after the massage that one day to take the edge off. I might mention at this point, too, that in the rehabilitation of rock and roll, in the whole first year in 2011 with rock, I only had him on bute for 5 days, twice in 365 days.
Okay.
The rest of the time, he had no drugs at all. That's what happens when you use these kinds of methods the right way. I know a lot of people expect, oh, my animal's out of alignment, I'll get the chiropractor to come out and put him back, and then he's okay. No, then he's not okay. They fix him for a show or something, and then they get him lined up for the show by the chiropractor, then they go to the show and ride him through it. And that's just not a really good idea. There's too many things happening when you're on board. Shifts of balance and everything that throw him off and make him have to catch his balance. And these things happen internally, so you can't even see it. You just know that, God, he went to the show, and now we're back home again, and he's sore again. That's because you didn't wait. You didn't go ahead and get him adjusted. You didn't follow it up with a massage. You didn't follow it up with leading through the hourglass pattern to make sure he's okay, that his core strength is supported again, and going through all the steps, the ground driving through the hourglass pattern, then the riding before you go to the show. You may have to just cancel going to the show. Yeah. And a lot of people don't like to do that. They want to go to the show. But if you're thinking about it in terms of your animal's health, then you got to think about these things in a realistic way.
So you prolonged his life. When you had to say goodbye to him, he had other friends there. I'm sure weren't they kind of lost without him?
Well, he wasn't really good friends with any of the other ones. They were new friends.
Okay.
See, and I did prolong his life. And, I might mention at this point, too, that we did x-rays regularly. And the x-rays that we did at the end, we found out that the ring bone and side bones in the 4 feet had not progressed at all.
Okay. All right.
They were not being aggravated because of this postural balance training. That gave him the core strength to be able to do all these other things and actually prolonged his life for another 9 years, 8 years beyond rock. Roll lived to be 27 years old.
Yeah.
And draft animals are lucky if they get between 20 and 25.
Right. Wow.
So, and this is true of horses and mules, depending on their care, of course. But this was just amazing that he was able to do all of this stuff as compromised as he was. And then at the end, he colicked. We noticed that he was having extreme difficulty finally at 27 years old getting up and down. He was losing his muscle tone in the hindquarters. And my observations are that the muscle tone starts deteriorating at about 20 years old. And at 25 years old, the core strength starts going backwards. I rescued another mule, and I got him at 25. He's 30 now.
Okay.
But I didn't bother doing the core strength training with him because of what I learned with Roll, and that was that just like us, you get to a certain point where your muscle tone starts to deteriorate, and no matter what you want to do, it's not going to regain its tone. There's nothing really to build on. You can only do minimal strengthening exercises. And in the case of an older person, it would be walking or riding. And it's got to be passive. You can't go galloping all over the place anymore.
Sure.
Because you're going to hurt yourself. You don't have the strength. You're not going to get the strength. And you're going to fall off. And then you got osteoporosis to deal with on top of that.
Right.
So, and they have those issues too. The bones start getting brittle. He was being very careful getting up and down, but it was a struggle for him towards the end.
Oh, sure.
And finally, because it was such a struggle, he went down and he couldn't get up.
Oh.
I called the vet. I had my ranch manager go in the house and call the vet. Meanwhile, I stayed in the pen with Roll and talked to him and encouraged him to get up. And, that guy wanted to please me so much that he kept trying to get up. He must have tried to get up 7 or 8 times and then would just fall back down and roll onto his side. And when the vet finally got there, he said, "This doesn't look good." And I said, "No, it really doesn't, but don't you think we've made it a long way past what we thought we were going to get?" He goes, "Oh, definitely. Definitely." I said, "Roll's been trying to get up while you were in transit, and he was trying to please me, but he just couldn't do it, and now he's tired."
Yeah.
So I said, "I don't think we should even ask him to get up again." And I said, "I'll show you what I mean." And so I went over by his head, and I said, "Rolly, come on, give it one more try. One more try, Rolly." And he rolled up onto his knees, and he went, "Ugh!" And then he just rolled back down again. And the vet goes, "That's remarkable that he wants to do that for you."
Yeah.
So I just held his head in my lap while the vet gave him tranquilizer. I don't like just doing the euthanasia because it makes them go into spasms, and it's very ugly.
Right.
We went ahead and gave him the tranquilizer, and he just kind of started to fall asleep in my lap. And I said, "Well, Rolly," I said, "we'd best say goodbye right now, and I'll see you on the other side of the Rainbow Bridge."
Yeah.
And he reached his muzzle up to my cheek and gave me a roly-poly kiss.
Oh.
It was so touching.
Yeah.
And I just kept him in my lap while the vet went ahead and gave him the rest of whatever, and he passed away in my lap. And it's so sad, but not sad, because I knew he went and joined Rock, who he really, really missed.
Sure. Yeah. Wow, this is such a touching story. You didn't tell me to bring a box of tissues this interview.
Well, that story is in the documentary on my website under the video on demand, the rock and roll story. Yeah. And it can also be purchased as a DVD in the store. The other thing is Rolly's story, his diary, is already posted under training on the website. And all of those things under training you can see for free. I don't charge for any of those. And I let people buy the books and videos at will, but they get to see what's in them by looking at all of those different diaries and all of those training tips and mule crossing articles and all the information that I have posted under training on the website. And after we did the story of rock and roll last week, I took a look and I realized that we didn't have the story of rock and roll under training. I had gone straight to doing the documentary and writing those 2 articles about it, and I didn't put the diary in there like I did with Roll. So I've been spending the last couple of weeks editing those things so they can be posted up there that whole year of 2011 when I did all the therapy on both animals in 2011. So I expect to be done with that probably in a week or 2, and I'm going to have my web guy go ahead and put that story up there too, and it will be categorized as Rock and Roll Diary of a Rescue up there, and that will take care of the details of all of the things that we did in the year 2011 with both of them. And then What's New with Roll takes off where it's after Rock died and all the different things that we did with Roll, which includes what we were talking about today, so that people will be able to get up there and see all the details on what we dealt with, because I am notorious for taking photographs, video, and writing notes every time I deal with those animals.
Right.
Every time the farrier comes out, every time the chiropractor comes out, every time the vet's out, every time the masseuse is out, and every single workout that I do with them. So you'll be able to get up there and read all that stuff and see all the pictures that correspond with it.
Wow, that is so neat. This has been a really, really good story to cover, and I appreciate you sharing that with us. I think I'm hungry. It's lunchtime, isn't it?
I think it is. And for the first time in a week, I actually am hungry.
Well, good.
I wasn't hungry when I was sick. I could care less.
Oh.
But I did get rid of the ring around the middle.
Okay. Well, there you go. That's
Yeah.
a plus. Okay. Well, you have a great afternoon, and we will talk soon.
That sounds great, Cindy. You too.
You can get in touch with Meredith Hodges at thelucky3ranch.com. Call her at 970-663-0066.
Gotta go. My mule is looking for me.
Mule Talk is an Every Cowgirls Dream production.